The Real History of the Samurai, The Way of the Warrior. Part 1, Shadows Before Dawn. The winter wind swept across the narrow valley of Sekigahara, carrying with it the metallic scent of approaching death. Frost clung to the tall grass like a final warning from the earth itself. Even before the clash of armies, the land seemed to know what was coming. In the dim, bluish glow of early dawn, rows of samurai adjusted their armor plates, due chest pieces polished. Sodi shoulder guards tightened, kabuto helmets pulled down until faceplates clicked into place. Each movement carried the weight of ritual, duty, and fear. Wind whistling, distant drums, armor clinking slowly, a low horn echoing across the empty fields. Among the ranks of Tokugawa Ieyasu's eastern army stood Sakata Jinsuk, a seasoned but weary retainer from Mikawa province. Though he had tasted battle before, nothing compared to the tension gripping his chest now. "Your hands are shaking," whispered his younger companion, Riku, leaning in as his breath fogged in the cold air. Jinsuk forced a smile. "If they weren't, I wouldn't be human." Riku chuckled nervously. "You think the Western forces will attack before midday?" Before Jinsuk could answer, a deep taiko drum boomed across the valley, rolling like thunder. Both men jolted, gripping their spears tighter. Distant shouts, commanders barking orders, flags whipping loudly in the wind. Across the fog, banners of Ishida Mitsunari's Western Coalition rose like dark ghosts, deep blues, reds, and blood-black Mon crests drifting in and out of the mist. Jinsuk swallowed hard as he imagined the men on the other side, rival clans, once allies, now enemies. He whispered to himself, "Bushido, guide me." The code of the samurai, loyalty, honor, bravery, felt heavier than his armor today, because civil war did not feel honorable. It felt tragic. "Spearmen, advance 10 steps," shouted their captain. The line shifted forward. Grass crunched under their sandals. Their breaths grew shallow. For a brief moment, the mist parted, and Jinsuk saw the Western riflemen lining up their Tanegashima matchlocks. His blood ran cold, the sharp hiss of match gourds igniting, crackling like angry serpents. Riku gasped. "Guns. They're preparing a volley." Jinsuk braced his legs. Then we meet fate standing. Seconds stretched like hours. A hawk circled overhead, its lonely cry piercing the silence just as... Thundering gunfire. Boom, boom, boom. The first volley exploded across the field. Soil burst into the air. Spears snapped. Men screamed. Riku was thrown backward as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Jinsuk caught him, dragging him down behind a mound of earth. "Stay with me." Riku breathed. "I'm fine." Riku groaned through clenched teeth, though his pale face betrayed the lie. Arrows slicing through air, drums pounding harder, men shouting, "Advance!" Jinsuk's captain roared, "Charge!" Close the distance before they reload. The eastern lines erupted forward. Jinsuk lifted his spear, heart hammering, legs shaking but determined. He had no choice. Bushido did not allow turning back. With a primal yell, he surged into the chaos. The fog swallowed him whole. The fog thinned as Jinsuk pushed forward, revealing flashes of steel, bursts of gun smoke, and silhouettes of men falling in violent jerks. The world narrowed to chaotic shapes and sounds. The clatter of armor, the crunch of boots on wet earth, and the shrill cries of commanders struggling to hold formation. A spear tip swung toward Jinsuk from the left. He twisted just in time, feeling the wind of the strike brush his cheek. He countered with a quick thrust, the blade sinking into an enemy's shoulder. The man screamed, dropping to his knees. Jinsuk pulled his weapon free and moved on. There was no time to look back, no time to think. Clashing steel, angry shouts, muffled thunder of distant guns. Riku's wounded voice echoed behind him somewhere in a frenzy, but Jinsuk couldn't turn back. The eastern lines were pushing hard, desperate to break through before another rifle volley could tear them apart. A mounted samurai from the Western Coalition charged out of the clearing mist, brandishing a curved katana. The horse's hooves pounded like a drum against the soaked ground. Jinsuk planted his feet, pointing his spear forward. The rider swung, a wide, brutal arc meant to split him in half. Jinsuk dropped to one knee and thrust upward. The blade pierced the horse's neck. The animal reared, shrieking, and collapsed sideways, taking its rider with it. Mud splashed across Jinsuk's face as he rolled away, barely avoiding the crushing weight. He rose, panting, heart hammering wildly. "Hold the line!" shouted the captain again, his voice cracking from strain. "Do not let them regroup." But the Western forces were regrouping. Their riflemen fell back behind a line of shield-bearing Ashigaru. A second row prepared match gourds. Jinsuk saw it. The disciplined movement, the practiced calm, a terrifying contrast to the chaos around him. "Another volley!" someone screamed. "Take cover." Jinsuk dug behind a fallen tree, just as the valley echoed with another concussive blast. Boom! Dirt exploded around him. A man's helmet flew through the air and landed beside him, crushed like paper. The screams that followed were raw, desperate. He shut his eyes for a moment, feeling the tremor in his fingers. "Is this honor?" he muttered bitterly. "Or madness?" But there was no answer, only the fading smoke. Then, amidst the chaos, a new sound cut through. A war horn, deep, relentless. From the ridge above, the banners of the Kobayakawa clan fluttered suddenly into view. Thousands of fresh troops stood poised, watching the battlefield from above. The entire valley seemed to freeze. Was this the moment they had feared? Would Kobayakawa Hideaki remain loyal to the Western coalition, or would he betray them? This single choice could shift the tide of the entire war. Jinsuk stared toward the ridge, breath held, blood pounding in his ears. Everything depended on that answer. And the horn echoed again. The horn's echo rolled across the valley, like a warning from the heavens. Every soldier, east and west, paused mid-strike, blades frozen inches from flesh, breaths caught in their throats. Even the smoke drifting across the battlefield seemed to slow, as if the world itself waited for Kobayakawa Hideaki's decision. Jinsuk wiped the mud from his eyes and stared up at the ridge. Thousands of spears glinted, unmoving. The Kobayakawa banners fluttered softly in the cold wind. Were they preparing to descend as enemies or allies? Riku's voice carried faintly from behind, weak but desperate. "Jinsuk, what's happening up there?" Jinsuk didn't answer. He couldn't. His entire body was locked in anticipation. Below the ridge, Ishida Mitsunari's Western commanders were shouting commands, urging Kobayakawa to attack the eastern flank. Their words barely reached the field, but their frantic gestures made their intention clear. Meanwhile, Tokugawa Ieyasu stood calmly atop his own hill, armored in black and gold. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He simply waited, still as a statue carved from iron. This, Jinsuk realized, wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. The fog shifted. A beam of late-morning sun pierced the valley and struck the Kobayakawa crest. Then came the sound, the stomp of thousands of feet, beginning to move. At first it was subtle, a faint tremor across the earth. Then louder, stronger, a rolling thunder of marching troops and clattering armor. Jinsuk's eyes widened. "They're coming," he whispered. But in which direction? The Kobayakawa forces descended the slope with terrifying momentum. Western troops raised their banners, cheering. Eastern ranks braced for death. And then, the Kobayakawa vanguard angled sharply, not toward the east, but directly into the western flank. A roar erupted across the battlefield as betrayal struck, like a blade to the spine of Ishida Mitsunari's army. The Western Ashigaru at the base of the ridge were crushed instantly under the weight of the sudden assault. Jinsuk exhaled the breath he didn't know he was holding. "They chose us," he said, disbelief softening into grim determination. Drums thundered. War cries tore through the air. Kobayakawa swords flashed like lightning. The valley exploded into chaos anew. Jinsuk rose to his feet as wounded soldiers stumbled past him, shouting warnings. "They're hitting us from the side. We're overrun. Retreat." "No, hold the line." He rushed back toward Riku, finding him propped against a fallen log, blood soaking to the cloth tied around his shoulder. "Is it over?" Riku asked through clenched teeth. "No," Jinsuk said. "It's just beginning again." An enemy Ashigaru lunged at them from the smoke. Jinsuk parried the strike and slashed downward, cutting through armor and sending the man collapsing into the grass. He grabbed Riku and hauled him up. "You stay behind me. We move with the advance." "But No arguing. Move." Around them, Eastern troops rallied with newfound strength. Kobayakawa's betrayal had shattered the Western formation. Mitsunari's lines wavered, bending inward like a collapsing gate. Yet victory was not certain. Not yet. The Western General Shimasa Khan led a countercharge, his warriors crashing into the chaos with fearless fury. Muskets fired point-blank into advancing troops. Arrows fell like rain. Steel clanged in relentless rhythm. Jinsuk plunged forward, spear cutting, blocking, striking, his mind reduced to instinct and survival. Sweat mixed with blood on his face. Men screamed. Horses toppled. Banners burned. The world was a blur of red and smoke. At last, breathless, he broke through a pocket of enemies and looked toward the Western command post. There, atop a rocky rise, surrounded by the remnants of his loyal troops, Ishida Mitsunari stood gripping his war fan, eyes burning with stubborn pride and heartbreak. Even from a distance, Jinsuk saw the truth. Mitsunari was defeated, but he would not flee. Not yet. Rika leaned heavily on Jinsuk, whispering, "Is this the end of the Western Army?" Jinsuk shook his head slowly. "No. The end comes when Mitsunari accepts it." And the man on the hill showed no sign of surrender. The smoke thickened around the Western command post as Ishida Mitsunari stood firm, refusing to abandon his collapsing army. His war fan, once a symbol of authority and strategy, now trembled slightly in his grip. Not from fear, but from the crushing weight of betrayal. He had trusted Kobayakawa Hideaki. He had believed loyalty still meant something in a fractured Japan. Jinsuk watched from below the rise, chest heaving, mud and blood streaked across his armor. Rika leaned heavily on his shoulder, barely able to stand but refusing to retreat. Around them, the Eastern forces regrouped, rallying behind the surge created by Kobayakawa's sudden assault. "Mitsunari still stands," Jinsuk said quietly. Riku swallowed, his voice raw. Shouldn't he flee? Live to fight again? Jinsuk shook his head. A samurai commander doesn't flee. Not today. Above them, a Western captain shouted, "Form a perimeter. Protect Lord Mitsunari." But the order sounded hollow, almost hopeless. Western warriors gathered around their leader, battered, bloodied, and dwindling. Their faces held a mixture of resolve and despair, men fighting for a cause slipping through their fingers like sand. From the eastern side, a new wave of troops charged, led by Honda Tadakatsu, Tokugawa's legendary general, famed for never suffering a wound in battle. His armor gleamed under the streaks of sunlight, piercing the smoke, the enormous antler helmet, making him tower over the battlefield like a mythical warrior. Push forward. Tadakatsu roared. And this now. His cavalry smashed into the western defenses with the force of a falling mountain. Jinsuk stumbled as the shockwave reached even his position. The ground vibrated with hooves pounding, the air filled with screams and the sharp ring of steel clashing. Rika's knees buckled, and Jinsuk caught him once more. "You can't stay here," Jinsuk urged. "You're going to collapse." Rika forced a weak smile. "If you're here, then so am I." Another explosion of musket fire erupted across the field. Smoke rolled in thick waves. Jinsuk shielded Riku with his own body, feeling the thud of bullets embedding into the earth inches away. Through the haze, Western banners began to fall one by one. A wounded samurai stumbled past them, dropping to his knees. "We're surrounded. They're everywhere. It's over." Jinsuk looked up again toward Mitsunari. The commander's robe snapped in the wind, its once bright colors now darkened with soot. His men held the line with desperate swings of their blades. But the eastern forces closed in like a tightening noose. The sound of steel striking steel echoed endlessly. Clang, clang, clang. Then an arrow flew toward Mitsunari, slicing the air with cruel precision. One of his guards leaped into its path, the shaft burying itself deep into the man's chest. He fell without a sound. Mitsunari didn't flinch, but his jaw clenched. Jinsuk felt a strange ache in his chest. Not pity, but recognition. Mitsunari fought with everything he had. Even knowing defeat, was inevitable. Honor wasn't always about victory. A sudden cry ripped through the smoke. Reinforcements from the west. For a heartbeat, hope flared, but it died instantly. It wasn't Western reinforcements. It was another Eastern division, Tori Motetada's troops, charging in from the far side, trapping Mitsunari entirely. Riku whispered, "They're going to slaughter them." "No," Jinsuk said. "They'll capture Mitsunari. Ieyasu wants him alive." The battlefield continued to shrink around the doomed commander. His troops fell back step by step, forming a shrinking circle. Their swords dripped with exhaustion as much as blood. A trembling Western soldier broke ranks and ran, screaming. Another followed. Panic spread like fire through dry grass. Still, Mitsunari did not move. "Lord Mitsunari," a surviving retainer cried. "We must escape. There is still a chance." "There is no honor in running," Mitsunari replied calmly. "Stand with me." Eastern troops closed in. Jinsuk could see their faces now. Hard, determined, efficient. The outcome was sealed. Jinsuk exhaled slowly. "This is the day Japan changes forever," he murmured. Riku's voice cracked softly. "And the day the samurai code is tested like never before." Up on the hill, Mitsunari raised his fan one last time. Not a command attack, but as a final gesture of defiance. Then, with a thunderous roar, the Eastern army surged. The final defense shattered, and the valley of Sekigahara fell silent, except for the wind sweeping away the last echoes of an empire built on steel and honor. The wind swept across the battlefield, carrying with it the stench of smoke, blood, and damp earth. The screams had faded, replaced by the distant moan of dying men, and the crackle of fires devouring abandoned banners. In the wake of Sekigahara's decisive clash, the valley had become a graveyard of samurai honor, silent, broken, and cold. Jinsuk stood amidst the aftermath, leaning heavily on his spear. His legs trembled from exhaustion, though adrenaline still pulsed faintly through his veins. Riku lay behind him under a makeshift shelter of shields and cloth, still conscious but fading in and out as blood seeped slowly from his bandaged shoulder. "Are we alive?" Riku murmured, eyes half open. "For now," Jinsuk replied. The fighting stopped. The truth was harsher than his words. The battle was won, but the suffering had only shifted. Groans rose from every direction. Wounded samurai reaching out for help, calling for comrades who would never answer. Crows circled overhead like dark spirits, searching for a place to descend. A group of Tokugawa soldiers marched past, dragging captured Western fighters with ropes tied around their wrists. Some staggered, some glared defiantly. Others stared at the ground, accepting their fate. One of them looked up and met Jinsuk's eyes. There was no hatred in that stare, only resignation. Jinsuk felt a weight in his chest. These men had fought with the same conviction, the same honor. Politics had divided them, not spirit. The samurai on both sides were bound by the same code, even as the war forced them to slaughter one another. How many more battles like this before Japan found peace? A trumpet sounded from the eastern command camp. Jinsuk turned to see Tokugawa, Ieyasu himself riding forward, flanked by his generals. His expression was calm, too calm for someone stepping onto a mountain of corpses. "He won," Riku whispered weakly, bitterness and all mixing in his voice. "It's over, isn't it?" "It's over for the Western coalition," Jinsuk said quietly. "But for Japan, a new struggle begins." As Ieyasu passed through the field, samurai lowered their heads in reverence. Jinsuk did the same, though something in him hesitated. Victory felt hollow. Ieyasu's power was undeniable, but so was the cost of achieving it. Nearby, a group of Eastern soldiers were searching for Ishida Mitsunari. They combed through fallen bodies, calling out, overturning armor and debris. The urgency in their voices revealed the truth. Mitsunari had escaped the battlefield. Riku coughed painfully. If he escapes far enough, he might rise again, gather forces. "No," Jinsuk said. "He's too proud for that. He'll face his fate." A moment later, the harsh cry of crows broke the quiet. Jinsuk turned just in time to see a Western samurai crawling toward them, his chest deeply wounded, blood trailing behind him. "Water," the man whispered. please. Jinsuk knelt immediately, ignoring the stains on his armor. He lifted the man gently, pouring a few drops of water from his flask onto his lips. The samurai's eyes softened. "You're Eastern?" "I'm a samurai," Jinsuk replied. "And so are you." The man managed a faint smile. "Honor survives longer than victory." His head fell back, breath leaving him slowly. Jinsuk closed the man's eyes with trembling fingers. A sudden rumble broke through the quiet. More Eastern soldiers approached, shouting orders. "Gather the wounded. Secure the prisoners. Prepare the field for inspection." Their movements were efficient, cold, focused, unfeeling. Jinsuk stood, helping Rika to his feet as well. "We have to move," he said. "If the officials come through here, they'll take you for dead or unfit to serve." Rika nodded weakly, leaning heavily against him. "Where were we going?" "To the temporary camp," Jinsuk replied. "We need to find a medic, and maybe a moment to breathe." They moved slowly across the field, stepping carefully among fallen bodies. Jinsuk tried not to look at their faces, but each one seemed to call out, a reminder of how fragile life and honor truly were. As they neared the eastern camp, they saw rows of tents rising in organized patterns. Lanterns flickered, casting soft halos in the thickening dusk. The calm of the camp contrasted sharply with the ruins behind them. Then a voice shouted, "Sakata Jinsuk of Mikawa!" Jinsuk froze. He turned to see a Tokugawa officer approaching swiftly, reading from a scroll. "You are summoned," the officer said firmly, "by Lord Honda Tadakatsu." Jinsuk stiffened. "Now!" Immediately, Rika gripped Jinsuk's arm. "What does he want with you?" Jinsuk exhaled slowly, eyes drifting toward the center of the command tents, where the highest-ranking generals gathered. "I don't know," he said, "but whatever it is, it will decide our future." Rika squeezed his arm once. "Go. I'll wait." Jinsuk stepped forward, heart pounding again. This time not from fear of death, but from the weight of uncertainty. The battle was over, but a new test awaited him. Inside the general's tent, decisions were being made, decisions that would shape the fate of Japan. And now, somehow, Jinsuk was being pulled into them. Jinsuk followed the officer through the maze of tents, each step echoing the tension in his chest. Lanterns swayed in the cold evening breeze, casting wavering shadows across the camp. The smell of medicine, blood, and burning wood filled the air. Everywhere he looked, wounded soldiers lay on straw mats while medics stitched wounds and whispered prayers. He passed a group of samurai cleaning their blades in silence. No laughter, no boasting, only hollow eyes staring into the dirt. Victory had come, but joy had not. Finally, the officer stopped at a large command tent guarded by 2 armored retainers. They stepped aside as Jinsuk approached. "Enter," one of them said. Jinsuk pushed through the flap. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with incense. Maps were spread across a large table, stained with mud and blood fingerprints. Senior commanders stood around the table, speaking in low voices. At the far end, Honda Tadakatsu, towering disciplined, his antlered helmet resting beside him, looked up as Jinsuk entered. "You are Sakata Jinsuk of Mikawa," Tadakatsu said, his voice deep and steady. "Yes, my lord," Jinsuk answered, bowing deeply. Tadakatsu studied him for a long moment. His gaze was sharp, like a blade measuring another blade. "I watched you fight today," Tadakatsu said. "You held your line even under rifle fire. You protected your comrades. You did not retreat when others faltered." Jinsuk felt the heat rise in his chest. He didn't fight for recognition, but the words struck him deeply. Another general spoke, arms folded behind his back. "We lost many men in the vanguard. We require disciplined samurai to fill essential roles in the coming days." Jinsuk breathed slowly. "I will serve in any way commanded." Tadakatsu stepped closer. "Good, because Lord Tokugawa himself has requested a list of reliable samurai for a special assignment." Jinsuk's heart thudded once, hard. "What assignment, my lord?" Before Tadakatsu could answer, the tent flap rustled. A Tokugawa retainer hurried in, kneeling quickly. "My lords, news from the Western Front. Ishida Mitsunari has been captured. A hush fell over the tent. Captured, not escaped, not dead. Captured. Jinsuk felt something heavy settle in the room, as though the very air thickened. Tadakatsu exchanged looks with his commanders, grim, victorious, but cautious. Where? Tadakatsu asked. In the mountains of Iba, the messenger replied. A group of villagers turned him in. He is being brought under guard, Sawayama. Jinsuk expected the room to erupt with celebration, but instead a deep silence prevailed, because this changed everything. Tadakatsu exhaled slowly. So the rebellion ended completely. One general nodded. And soon, Lord Tokugawa will shape the new Japan. The officer who summoned Jinsuk stepped forward. Lord Tadakatsu, shall I inform the others about the selected samurai? Tadakatsu nodded, then turned back to Jinsuk. You asked about your assignment. Tadakatsu said. Very well. Listen carefully. Jinsuk straightened, palms sweating inside his gauntlets. You will be part of a special escort division. Tadakatsu continued. A unit tasked with safeguarding critical envoys and securing routes as Lord Tokugawa begins to reorganize the land. Jinsuk blinked. He had expected reconnaissance work, maybe guard duty. But this was political. My lord, I am honored, Jinsuk replied, bowing again. Tadakatsu's eyes sharpened. Honor will not be enough. In the weeks ahead, you'll face danger more subtle and more treacherous than today's battlefield. The tent seemed to close in around Jinsuk. Another general stepped forward. Not everyone accepts Tokugawa rule. Loyalists to the Toyotomi clan remain scattered. Ronin will rise. Some clans will resist. Bloodshed may continue in shadows long after today's battle ended. Jinsuk absorbed each word. The war was moving from armies to whispers, from open fields to hidden daggers. Tadakatsu crossed his arms. Your task begins tomorrow. You will be assigned under a new captain, operating independently from your previous unit. Jinsuk nodded firmly. I am ready. Good, Tadakatsu said. Then return to your comrade. Rest. You will need your strength. Jinsuk stepped back, bowing low before leaving the tent. Outside, the night had grown colder. Fires flickered across the camp. The battlefield behind him now lay quiet, like a world that had ended. Riku looked up as Jinsuk approached. You're back, he whispered. What do they want? Jinsuk sat beside him, staring at the horizon. The stars were faint behind drifting clouds. They want us, Jinsuk said slowly, to keep fighting. Riku frowned. But the war is over. Jinsuk shook his head. No, he murmured. The sword has stopped, but the danger hasn't. He glanced at the dark valley, where the dead still lay untouched. The real battle, Jinsuk whispered, is just beginning. The moon dipped low behind a bank of drifting clouds as the caravan pushed deeper into the mountain pass. Cold air knifed through the narrow trail, carrying with it the scent of pine sap and distant snowfall. Caden pulled his cloak tighter, his eyes scanning the darkness. Every few minutes, he glanced over his shoulder at Mira, who rode beside the covered wagon, her fingers wrapped tightly around her bow. She said nothing, but the tension in the set of her jaw told him everything. She felt it too. Something was wrong. Behind them, Captain Rowan slowed his horse. Quiet, he murmured, raising a fist. The caravan obeyed instantly. The only sound was a wind whistling between jagged cliffs. Caden held his breath. A moment later he heard it. A faint, rhythmic crunching on the ridge above. Not the sound of falling rocks. Steps, many of them. Myra's gaze snapped upward. We're not alone. Rowan slid off his horse and motioned for the torchbearers to extinguish their flames. Darkness swallowed the pass. The captain moved to the front of the caravan and whispered, Shields up, stay close to the wagons. If they attack, push toward the southern fork. Caden's heart hammered, but he nodded. His fingers tightened around his spear as shadows shifted on the ridge. At first he thought the figures were just rocks, but then one of them moved, slow, deliberate, predatory. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Down! Rowan roared. Arrows rained from above. hissing like angry insects. Caden threw himself behind a wagon wheel as shafts thudded into the wood. Horses neighed wildly, rearing against their reins. Mira loosed 3 arrows in rapid succession, each one vanishing into the darkness. The attackers descended the cliffs with terrifying speed. Clad in ash-gray armor and masks carved with snarling beasts, they moved like wraiths. One landed just a few steps from Caden, blades drawn. The soldier lunged forward, steel glinting faintly in the moonlight. Caden blocked the first strike with the shaft of his spear. The second grazed his shoulder, ripping fabric but missing flesh. He kicked hard, knocking the masked warrior back before sweeping his spear in a wide arc. The warrior's mask cracked with a dull snap as he collapsed into the dust. Myra's voice cut through the chaos. Caden left. He spun just as another attacker leaped forward, but this time Rowan intercepted, his sword cleaving through the enemy's guard. We move now. Push south. The caravan surged forward, wheels grinding against rock, soldiers forming a protective ring. The masked fighters pursued relentlessly, their footsteps barely audible over the thunder of hooves. As they rounded the bend, Caden looked back and caught a final glimpse of the ridge, just long enough to see a tall figure standing alone, untouched by the battle, cloaked in black, face hidden beneath a horned mask. The figure raised one hand slowly, almost an acknowledgement. Mira saw it too. That's their leader. Caden felt a chill crawl across his skin. Whoever that figure was, the attack wasn't just an ambush. It was a message, and the real battle hadn't even begun. The storm clouds thickened overhead as the caravan pushed deeper into the southern fork. The narrow path twisted between towering cliffs that seemed to close in with every step. The horses were exhausted, their breaths forming pale plumes in the cold night air. Caden walked beside Mira now, both of them glancing back every few seconds, expecting to see masked warriors emerging from the shadows. But none came. Rowan didn't relax. If anything, the captain grew more tense. His hand never left the hilt of his sword, and every small sound, a loose pebble, a gust of wind, made him turn sharply. "They're not retreating," he muttered. "They're repositioning." Mira brushed a strand of hair from her face, her expression hard. That leader, the one watching us, he didn't move the entire time, like he wanted us to see him. Caden swallowed. He could still picture the horn mask illuminated by flashes of moonlight. He felt different. The others were soldiers. That one was something else. Mira finished. The path widened into a plateau overlooking a steep ravine. Rowan signaled for the caravan to halt. "We rest here, but quietly. No fires." The soldiers formed a half-circle around the wagons. Caden dropped onto a boulder, rubbing his aching shoulder. Mira sat beside him, her bow resting across her knees. She didn't speak for a long time. Neither did he. The silence of the mountains felt alive, waiting. Suddenly, a soft rustling echoed from the tree line to the east. Rowan raised a hand, and every soldier froze. Myra's fingers closed around an arrow, drawing it halfway before she even breathed in. A figure stepped from the trees. Not masked, not armored. A woman. Her clothes were torn, her hair wild, and her face streaked with dirt. She stumbled toward them, one hand clutching her side as if holding herself together. "Please." Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "Help me?" Rowan moved forward slowly, cautiously. "Who are you?" She lifted her head, revealing eyes filled with terror. "They're coming," she gasped. "The Order of the Veiled Horn. They burned my village. They took everyone." Caden felt ice flood his veins. The horn mask, the leader on the ridge. "They attacked you too?" The woman nodded frantically. "They're hunting anyone who refuses to join them, and they won't stop until they control the entire frontier." Mira stepped closer. "What do they want with us?" The woman's gaze locked onto Caden for a moment, long enough for fear to deepen in her expression. "They're not after your caravan," she whispered. "They're after one of you." Caden's breath stalled. "Who?" Before she could answer, a deafening sound cracked through the mountains, a long, echoing horn blast that rolled across the ravine like thunder. Myra's eyes widened. "They found us." Rowan drew his sword. Positions. Protect the wagons. The woman collapsed to her knees, shaking. It's him, she choked out. The one with the horn mask. He's coming. Caden gripped the spear, heartbeat pounding against his ribs. He didn't know why the masked leader was hunting them, or who among them had drawn his wrath. But the truth was closing in like a storm, and nothing could stop it now. Torches flickered like a river of fire as the warriors of the Veiled Horn climbed the ridge, their shadows stretching tall against the jagged rock walls. The horn call still echoed faintly, a hollow, bone-deep sound that seemed to vibrate in Caden's chest. He crouched behind an overturned wagon, spear tight in his hands, breath fogging in short, frantic bursts. Rowan moved along the defensive line, whispering commands. Hold until my signal. Don't waste arrows. Aim for the climbers first. Mira, perched on a boulder with her bow strung, whispered down to Caden. They're moving slower than before. They're expecting a trap. Caden nodded, though he didn't trust his voice. His palms were damp, his muscles trembling. Fear crawled up his spine, icy and sharp. He tried to steady his breathing, to summon the discipline Rowan had taught him. Focus on what you can control. But he couldn't stop replaying the woman's warning. They're after one of you. Who? Why? A rock tumbled down the slope. Then another. Then a figure appeared, climbing the ridge with slow, deliberate precision, not charging, watching. The horn mask. Even from a distance, Caden felt the presence of the masked leader, like a weight pressing down on him. The man stood motionless at the edge of the ridge, cloak shifting in the wind, horn silhouette sharp against the torchlit mountains. Rowan hissed, "Archers!" Before he could finish, Mira fired. Her arrows sliced the air, whistling straight toward the masked figure, only for another warrior to leap in front of him, taking a hit in the chest and tumbling backward down the rocks. Mira swore under her breath. He's using them as shields. The masked leader raised one arm. A second horn call sounded, closer this time, and dozens of warriors surged forward, rushing down the slope in a wave of steel and fury. "Hold!" Rowan shouted. The first of the attackers reached the plateau, leaping over rocks like wolves descending on prey. Caden thrust his spear, catching one in the shoulder. The impact shocked his arms, but he held firm, pushing the man backward. Mira fired again and again, each arrow striking with deadly precision. Soldiers clashed with the masked warriors in brutal flashes of steel. The air filled with screams, metal scraping, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the ground. Caden ducked under a sweeping blade, rolling across the dirt. The warrior lunged him again, but Caden drove his spear upward, piercing the man's thigh. The attacker collapsed, howling. Rowan cut down two more before shouting, "Fall back to the wagons!" Caden sprinted toward the center, heart hammering, lungs burning. He turned and froze. The masked leader was gone from the ridge. A chill slithered through his bones. "Mira!" he shouted. He disappeared. She scanned the cliffs frantically. He's moving. Fast. A scream tore through the night. One of their soldiers, dragged into the shadows by an unseen figure. Rowan cursed. "He's picking us apart." Caden tightened his grip on his spear, forcing himself to step forward even though every instinct screamed to run. The masked leader wasn't fighting like an ordinary warrior. He was hunting, and Caden could feel, deep in his gut, that the man's target was getting closer. Another horn blast shattered the air, this time right behind the wagons. Caden spun, breath catching. He's inside the perimeter. Mira jumped down from her perch, drawing her short blade. Rowan rushed toward the wagons with two soldiers, shouting orders. But Caden didn't wait. Something pulled him forward, deeper than instinct, an unexplainable force pushing him toward the center of the caravan, toward the darkness where the masked leader waited. Caden's footsteps pounded the dirt as he ran, each beat echoing in his skull. He knew, without logic, without evidence, the truth the woman had not spoken. The masked leader wasn't hunting the caravan. He was hunting him. The air grew heavier as Caden moved closer to the center of the caravan. Every sound seemed magnified. The clatter of armor, the sharpest of arrows, the groan of frightened horses. Shadows flickered in torchlight, twisting across the faces of soldiers frozen with fear. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, though none dared speak above the chaos. Then he saw him. The masked leader stood at the edge of the wagons, perfectly still, horns silhouetted against the flickering flames. The figure's presence alone sent a shiver down Caden's spine. He could feel the cold precision behind that stance, the predator waiting for the slightest weakness. Caden raised a spear, arms trembling. "I won't." His words caught in his throat as a volley of arrows hissed past, striking the ground inches away. Sparks of wood and stone flew, sending dust into his eyes. Rowan shouted behind him, "Form a circle, protect the wagons." But the masked leader did not charge. He didn't need to. He moved like smoke, silent and unnerving, slipping between soldiers, testing defenses. Each step brought him closer to Caden, and with every movement, the sense of inevitability grew. Mira dropped low, slashing at a warrior who lunged from the shadows. "He's not attacking them, he's hunting you," she screamed. Caden's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to flee, but he stayed rooted. The warriors around him were still, caught in the tension, waiting to see who would move first. The masked leader stopped 2 meters away. The horns gleamed in the torchlight, and then he raised one hand, slow, deliberate, and pointed directly at Caden. Time seemed to freeze. Caden's heart thundered in his ears. His mind raced. Should he strike first? Should he wait? The leader tilted his head. No words were spoken, yet Caden felt the message clearly. You cannot escape. An eerie calm settled over the battlefield. The chaos of the surrounding fight became distant, almost irrelevant. The soldiers, the wagons, the fires, they all receded into shadows. All that existed was Caden and the masked figure. A step forward. Caden mirrored it. Another. The leader advanced. Steel flashed suddenly, a dagger thrown from the side. Caden barely blocked it with the butt of his spear. Sparks flew. The warrior behind the dagger collapsed, struck by Myra's arrow. The masked leader didn't flinch. He moved again. Caden realized with a jolt that this was not a fight of strength or numbers. It was a test, a reckoning, and he was the only one being judged. Breath burning, spear at the ready, Caden tightened his grip. The masked leader circled him slowly, every movement deliberate, every eye unseen but felt. Then, without warning, he lunged, and the world exploded into motion. Caden barely had time to react. The masked leader's movement was impossibly fast, a blur of black and steel. He feinted to the left, then struck downward with a curved blade that hissed through the air like a living thing. Caden thrust his spear upward just in time, feeling the impact jolt through his arms. The force knocked him backward, but he stumbled only slightly, keeping his balance on the uneven ground. Mira fired 2 arrows, one hitting a nearby warrior who had tried to flank Caden, the other embedding into the wooden frame of a wagon. The masked leader didn't falter. Every attack seemed to anticipate it, every defense perfectly countered. Caden's breath came in ragged gasps. His arms ached, his legs trembled, but he forced himself to focus. The leader's stance, the tilt of his shoulders, the subtle shift of weight, it all hinted at the next strike. Another lunge. Caden sidestepped, driving his spear toward the masked figure's side. The weapon struck, sliding along armor with a metallic screech. Sparks flew, and the figure twisted gracefully out of reach, turning Caden's strike into a glancing blow. "You fight well," a low, controlled voice said from beneath the mask. "But courage alone will not save you." Caden's eyes narrowed. He didn't know whether to be insulted or terrified. His grip tightened. "I don't intend to be saved," he spat. The masked leader circled again, each step measured, unhurried, as if Caden were a puzzle to be solved rather than a foe to be defeated. Soldiers around them froze, unable to intervene, caught in the hypnotic tension between hunter and hunted. Suddenly, the leader feinted left, drawing Caden into a counterstrike. Caden lunged, spear forward, and felt a sharp pain as a hidden blade grazed his side, cutting through cloth and drawing first blood. He staggered but did not fall. Myra's eyes widened. "Caden!" she shouted. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," he gasped, though the sharp sting told him otherwise. "Focus. Don't let him corner you." The masked leader's eyes, hidden beneath the horns but somehow visible in their intent, locked on Caden with piercing precision. Then, in a single fluid motion, he swept low, knocking Caden off balance. Caden rolled across the dirt, barely avoiding a second dagger aimed at his throat. Rising, he realized the fight was no longer about survival. It was about endurance, strategy, and willpower. Each movement had to be deliberate, each strike calculated. One misstep, one hesitation, and it would end. Caden steadied himself, lowering his spear. His mind raced. He's fast, stronger than any soldier I face, but he leaves patterns. He took a breath, centering himself. Sweat mixed with blood from his side, dripping into his eyes. Pain sharpened his focus. The masked leader circled once more, and this time Caden moved first. A feint to the right, a sudden thrust forward, and a desperate swing to break the rhythm of the hunt. The leader parried, stepping back. For the first time, Caden saw something, a flicker of calculation, of curiosity perhaps. The battle had shifted. The hunter was testing the prey. And Caden knew that if he could endure this trial, if he could read the rhythm, he might survive. But survival alone would not be enough. The fight was far from over. Caden's muscles burned, his side a raw reminder of the masked leader's skill. Every breath was a struggle, but he forced himself to stay on his feet. Around the caravan, the battle continued in chaotic bursts, arrows and blades clashing, shouts echoing, horses rearing. But all of it faded into background noise as he faced a man in black. The masked leader circled again, deliberately slow this time, forcing Caden to move with him. Each step was measured, calculated. Caden noticed a subtle shift of weight before each feint, the rhythm of his attacks, the way his cloak swirled just before he struck. A plan began forming in Caden's mind. He couldn't match this opponent in raw speed or strength, but perhaps he could outthink him. He feigned a stumble, letting his spear droop just enough to invite the strike. The leader's blade shot forward in response, precise and deadly. Caden twisted sharply, sidestepping the swing, and pivoted to strike upward at the attacker's exposed side. The blade connected with metallic clang, not flesh, but it was enough to provoke a reaction. The masked figure recoiled slightly, circling faster now. His strikes became more aggressive, more urgent. Caden realized that it disrupted the rhythm, forced the hunter out of his perfect pattern. Mira shouted from the edge of the fray, her voice a tether to reality. "Caden, watch your left." A dagger whistled past, slicing into the dirt mere inches from him. Caden twisted, thrusting his spear outward in a sweeping motion that knocked the attacker away. Then, taking advantage of the pause, he surged forward, spear aimed for the masked leader's midsection. The leader blocked with a swift arc of his blade, sparks flying where metal met metal. They locked eyes for the briefest instant. Caden sensed something almost human beneath the mask, an acknowledgement, a challenge, a test. With a roar of effort, Caden pivoted again, rolling to his feet while thrusting upward with all his remaining strength. The leader leaped back, just avoiding the strike, but Caden noticed a slight stumble in his footwork, a minor flaw, but enough. He pressed the advantage, keeping the leader moving, forcing him into reactions rather than calculated attacks. Sweat burned his eyes. Blood from his side dripped onto the dirt. Each movement threatened to topple him, but he couldn't stop. Not now. The battle around them slowed, as if sensing the duel's intensity. Soldiers on both sides faltered, arrows missing, swords swinging into empty air. The two figures became the eye of the storm. Then, suddenly, the masked leader stopped. He crouched slightly, observing Caden with deliberate calm, as if measuring not only his skill but his endurance, his resolve. "You've learned quickly," the low voice beneath the mask said, carrying easily across the plateau. "But the night is long and the hunt is not finished." Caden wiped blood from his brow, lowering his spear slightly. "Then we continue," he said through gritted teeth, heart hammering, blood and sweat mixing in the dirt. The masked leader's horns caught the torchlight as he straightened, moving with a silent promise of renewed assault. Caden braced himself. This was no longer a test of strength alone. It was a battle of will, cunning, and survival, and only one of them would emerge unbroken. The first light of dawn broke over the jagged mountains, casting pale streaks across the battlefield. Smoke still curled from smoldering wagons and scorched earth, but the fight between Caden and the masked leader showed no sign of fatigue. Both moved with lethal precision, their shadows dancing across the rocks in perfect symmetry. Caden's side throbbed with pain, and every muscle screamed in protest, but he refused to yield. The masked leader's movements had become slightly less fluid, a fraction slower. Enough for Caden to recognize the pattern, enough to anticipate the next strike. A sudden cry from Mira drew Caden's attention to a small group of veiled horned warriors attempting to flank the caravan. Without hesitation, he lunged, knocking one aside with but his spear, sending the attacker sprawling into the dirt. Another arrow from Mira followed, piercing another assailant, but the masked leader did not pause. He moved like liquid shadow, closing the distance between them again. Caden's spear met the leader's blade with a deafening clang. Sparks flew, ricocheting against the rocks, and the shockwave forced Caden to stumble backward. "You survived longer than most," the low, controlled voice said beneath the mask. "But skill alone will not win this fight." Caden's chest heaved. "Then I'll rely on more than skill." He pivoted, aiming a sudden thrust for the masked leader's midsection. The figure blocked, but Caden immediately rolled to the side, coming up behind him with a sweeping strike aimed at his legs. The leader twisted, narrowly avoiding the blow, and for a heartbeat, Caden thought he had succeeded. Then the masked warrior's blade flashed upward, cutting a narrow line across Caden's shoulder. Pain flared, but Caden gritted his teeth and pressed on. Myra's voice rang in his ears. "Caden, don't give him the center of the fight." He realized she was right. He had been too focused, too direct. The leader was drawing him into a trap, using his attacks against him. Adjusting his stance, Caden began to circle, forcing the masked figure to move, to react, to expose his weaknesses. A moment of opportunity arrived. A small misstep, a flicker of hesitation in the leader's footwork. Caden struck with all the strength left in his arms, driving his spear upward. The leader parried, but the force knocked him back a step. The two circled each other, breathing heavily, eyes locked. For the first time, the tension of the night seemed to ease slightly, replaced with an unspoken respect between predator and prey. "You endure well," the leader said. "Few can face me this long and remain standing." "I've learned from the worst," Caden replied, voice steady despite exhaustion. "And I intend to survive." The leader's head tilted, considering. Then, without warning, he disappeared into the shadows behind the wagons, leaving only the echo of his cloak in the morning wind. Caden lowered his spear, chest heaving, adrenaline slowly ebbing. He scanned the area. The veiled horned warriors were retreating, regrouping in the distance. Mira came to his side, eyes wide but relieved. "He's gone for now," she said quietly. "But he'll be back." Caden nodded, knowing she was right. The fight had ended, but the war, the true hunt, was far from over. And somewhere in the mountains, the masked leader was already planning his next move. The morning mist clung to the jagged cliffs as the caravan slowly resumed its march. The air was thick with the scent of blood, smoke, and damp earth. Horses moved cautiously, their hooves clattering over loose stone, while soldiers tightened their formation around the wagons. Caden walked at the center, spear in hand, every sense alert. He could still feel the shadow of the masked leader lingering, like a phantom at the edge of his vision. Mira rode beside him, scanning every ridge and crevice. "He won't give up," she said softly. "Not until he gets what he wants." Caden nodded, his mind replaying the fight from the previous night. The leader's speed, precision, and uncanny awareness. It wasn't natural. Every strike, every feint, every parry had been calculated to test him. And yet, Caden had survived. Barely. Rowan's voice broke through his thoughts. "Stay focused. The path narrows ahead. Any wrong step and we're trapped." The path twisted sharply, forcing the caravan into a narrow gorge between cliffs. Caden's eyes swept the ridges above. Nothing moved. Too quiet. He crouched beside a wagon, whispering to Mira. "This is an ambush waiting to happen. He's studying us, waiting for the perfect moment." She nodded, drawing an arrow. "Then we'll make him pay for every step." The tension stretched like a taut bowstring as they moved forward. Every sound, the scrape of metal, the hiss of a loose rock, even the distant crow of a bird, felt amplified, warning of unseen danger. Caden's muscles coiled, ready for attack at any moment. Suddenly, a shadow flitted across the far wall of the gorge. Too fast to be human, too deliberate to be coincidence. Caden's heart skipped a beat. "There!" he shouted. "Above us!" Arrows hissed down from the ridge, embedding the ground, the wagons, and the earth around them. Horses reared, screaming. Soldiers scrambled for cover, shields raised. Caden thrust his spear into the dirt, steadying himself. The masked leader dropped from above with inhuman speed, landing silently amidst the chaos. His blade glinted in the weak sunlight, and he moved like a phantom to the soldiers, targeting Caden with a predator's focus. Mira loosed arrows rapidly, cutting down two warriors attempting to flank him, but the leader's attention never wavered. He circled Caden, forcing him into constant motion, striking with precise, calculated blows. Each strike carried weight. Each movement threatened a fatal mistake. Caden blocked and parried, countering only when he saw a clear opening. Sweat and blood stung his eyes. His breathing came in ragged gasps, and yet he refused to yield. Every ounce of his focus, every drop of his strength, was committed to survival. A sudden scream tore through the gorge. Caden glanced to see one of the soldiers taken down, swept aside by a masked warrior. Fear surged through the remaining fighters, but Caden's resolve hardened. He realized then that this was no longer just a fight. It was a proving ground. Every move he made, every strike he blocked or delivered, was a test of endurance, cunning, and courage. The masked leader paused for a heartbeat, studying Caden. Then, with a fluid motion, he lunged. Caden braced, gripping his spear tightly. The collision of steel against steel rang through the gorge, echoing off the cliffs like a war drum. Neither would yield, and in that narrow mountain pass, the battle for survival, for honor, and for mastery was reaching its crescendo. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist and revealing the full scale of the gorge. Bodies littered the path, weapons and armor scattered, and the wounded groaned weakly, clutching bloody limbs. The caravan had slowed to a crawl, each soldier moving with exhaustion and fear etched into their faces. Yet at the center of it all, Caden faced a masked leader once more. Two figures locked in a deadly dance of steel and will. Caden's arms shook from fatigue, blood from his side dripping into the dirt. Every movement required conscious effort. Every strike a calculated risk. He could feel the leader testing him, pushing him to the limits, and yet he endured. The masked figure lunged again, faster than Caden could track. He twisted, narrowly avoiding the strike, and countered with a swift thrust of his spear. Metal clashed. Sparks flew. The impact reverberated through Caden's shoulders. "You survived longer than anyone else," the leader said, voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "Few possess your skill or your resolve." Caden forced a harsh breath. "Then I'll survive until the end. That is all I owe." The leader paused, tilting his head as if considering something deeper than the fight itself. Then, without warning, he retreated a step, disappearing momentarily into the shadows of the wagons. Caden lowered his spear, heart racing, muscles trembling. He scanned the area. The remaining warriors of the Veiled Horn had pulled back, regrouping atop the cliffs, their horns signaling the end of the ambush for now. Mira approached, bow lowered, eyes wary. "He's gone?" she asked, voice tight with tension. Caden nodded slowly, still breathing heavily. "For now, but he's not finished. This was a trial." Rowan clapped a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You've earned your place among the samurai, Caden, not by victory alone, but by standing when others would fall." Caden's gaze drifted to the distant cliffs, where the masked leader had vanished. Despite exhaustion, a sense of understanding had settled within him. This enemy was more than a fighter. He was a measure of courage, a force that would shape those who survived encounters with him. He turned back to Mira, to the caravan, to the wounded and the weary soldiers who had endured alongside him. The path forward would be perilous, and battles, both visible and hidden, still lay ahead. Yet Caden felt a spark of clarity. Survival alone was not enough. Honor, courage, and the willingness to face the unknown were what truly defined a warrior. The caravan resumed its march, slowly but with purpose. Caden kept his spear ready, eyes scanning the horizon. Somewhere in the shadows of the mountains, the masked leader would return. But now Caden was prepared, not only with skill, but with resolve hardened in the fires of trial. And as the sun rose fully over the jagged peaks, it cast long, unwavering light over the path ahead. A reminder that even after the darkest battles, the way of the warrior endured. The cost of war was high, the price of courage immense. But through sacrifice and perseverance, those who survived carried the legacy forward. Caden tightened his grip on his spear and stepped forward, knowing that the world would test him again, but also knowing that he would meet each challenge with unbroken spirit. The hunt was over, for now, but the journey, the duty, and the honor of the warrior would never end.